Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Office Hours. We're doing something a little different today, kind of like last week. I have no guest joining me at this time, but don't worry. As y'all all know, if you've been at any of our sessions before, I can fill the time pretty well. So I've got a lot to talk about. That said, I thought I would take this opportunity to share some perspectives on where I see things heading in revenue cycle management. I've been having a ton of conversations lately with clients, with internal teams, with industry peers, and some very clear trends are starting to emerge. So today's session is going to be a guided walkthrough, if you will, of six major shifts that I believe are reshaping how we think about RCM, especially when it comes to automation and AI agents. But before we get into the six shifts, let's take a minute to talk about what we really actually mean when we say agent, because this word gets thrown around a lot. And I want to be really clear about how we're using it in this conversation specifically, but also kind of frame how we're using that term broadly now in RCM. Now, in the revenue cycle world, when we hear agent, we typically think of a person. It's maybe a prior authorization agent, an AR follow-up agent, perhaps a billing specialist. These are human agents, individuals who specialize in a process or a function. They're skilled. They follow protocols. They usually work within a narrow swim lane of responsibility. But when I talk about AI agents, we're talking about technology and more sophisticated than just scripts or bots. Now, officially, an AI agent is a digital entity with a specific set of skills designed to complete a task, make decisions, and take action autonomously. Sounds very familiar, right? Kind of sounds like a human specialist or that human agent that I was talking about earlier. Now, and they often collaborate with human team members as part of that process. So it's not just reading data or pushing buttons, it's observing a process, it's understanding the context, and it's responding in real time with reasoning. And that's the key word, reasoning. So let me give you an example. A traditional automation bot might check the claim status portal of an update or any log that results into your, and then puts that information back into your EHR, or maybe it's your RCM system or billing system. Even though that's very useful, but it's still just a task runner. Now, an AI agent, on the other hand, doesn't just report status, it evaluates it. It might recognize that a claim was denied for a coverage reason. It could even then check eligibility based on that denial. And then it may determine if a corrected claim is appropriate. And then it even may even start an appeals process, all without needing to escalate to a human unless something falls outside the rules. Now, some of the characteristics of AI agents are goal oriented. They're not just executing steps, they're trying to accomplish an outcome. Context awareness. They understand past activity, current conditions, and future steps. Very collaborative. They know when to hand off to a human or even another system. The term interoperability comes to mind there. They're very adaptive. They learn over time and improve performance with feedback. And some of these characteristics are very similar to human agents, and that's kind of the connection that I want to make here. So here's the key difference, though, between what agents do and what your traditional technology has done in the past, is they operate with agency, meaning they don't just wait to be triggered. They know what success looks like and they pursue it within their bounds. So when we talk about these six shifts, we're not talking about automation as in set it and forget it. We're talking about how the revenue cycle is evolving now that we have agents working alongside our teams. Agents that reduce friction, increase precision, and act as intelligent extensions of the human workforce. With that framing, let's look at the first big shift I see, and it's a big one. So it's all about moving from automation to intelligence. And while that may sound like a buzzword upgrade, I think it marks a fundamental difference in how organizations think about technology inside the revenue cycle. Now, a few years ago, automation was about saving time. You'd hear things like, we have a bot that logs into the portal, or perhaps we built a workflow to push eligibility checks automatically. And that was great. It helped offset labor shortages, it reduced manual clicks, and handled volume at scale. But at the end of the day, it was still step-based automation. You tell the system what to do, and it follows those steps until it doesn't because something breaks broke or something changed in the process. Now, and especially over the last 6 to 12 months, the conversation is shifting. Organizations are asking, can this technology make decisions? Can it prioritize tasks? Can it tell me which denials need attention first? Can it route a claim differently based on payer behavior or documentation flags? And that's not automation, that's intelligence. And it's where AI agents start to play a more active role. Now, think about how a seasoned team member works. They have a lot of tribal knowledge, right? They don't just execute tasks, they assess, they triage, they decide. They look at the big picture and adjust based on what's changed. That's the bar now for digital agents. They're not just here to follow rules, they're here to optimize outcomes. For example, a traditional automation might handle claim status checks in bulk, and that's very helpful, but it treats every claim the same. An AI agent, on the other hand, might look at your work list and say, well, these 50 claims are stuck because of eligibility issues with Blue Cross Blue Shield. And we've seen this pattern before. Here's a batch fix that we can start. And then these other 12 are on track for automation adjudication. No human really needs to touch them. So don't even bother. And then these three, well, they're high dollar, high risk, and trending late. Let's surface these to, say, a human specialist. So that's not just faster, that's smarter. That's revenue cycle intelligence. And what I find interesting is that this shift changes how people measure value. Before, you might hear things like, this tool saves us 12 minutes per task. And that's very true. That's a very good value. Now it's more like, this agent reduced our touch points by 60%. It helped us recover $300,000 in underpaid claims. And you may hear that it flagged 3 system gaps that we didn't even know that existed. Well, that's more strategic value proposition. And it's what executives are expecting out of AI right now. So these executives where AI, people were kind of hesitant, kind of reluctant to go into it, but now it's matured. There's been this maturity process. It's kind of grown up in that process. People are more educated. Now there's better expectations through their experiences with AI. But this also brings up a concern that I hear often. And if these agents are learning and making decisions, how do we know they're making the right ones? Well, we can say that about some of our people too. But at any rate, that's a valid concern. Trust is earned, especially when you're talking about tasks tied to revenue and compliance. Well, the good news is that intelligence doesn't mean mystery. Modern AI agents are built with transparency and auditability in mind. They log their actions, they show why a claim was routed or why a denial was flagged. And importantly, they give your team the ability to review, override, or refine the logic as needed. So the shift isn't about giving up control, it's about scaling your control. You're extending the reach of your human expertise, using agents to carry out decisions at scale while your team focuses on exception handling and strategy. So the bottom line here is, automation got us through the last few years, but intelligence through well-designed agents, and that's pretty key, is what's going to carry us forward. So that's shift number one, and it sets the tone for everything that follows. Now, the second major shift that we're seeing is this, and that is, front-end coverage validation is no longer just an administrative checkpoint. It's now a clinical priority. Now, for years, these front-end insurance checks were seen as administrative chores, necessary but not necessarily critical from a clinical standpoint, because it's all about getting the right paperwork. No problem. Let's go ahead and schedule. Let's go ahead and get this test done. Now, they were often completed late in the process, right before maybe the patient arrived, or maybe a few days before the patient arrived, and rarely integrated into the clinical planning itself. But in 2025, that mindset doesn't hold up. Delays or gaps in this process are causing real clinical disruption. I've talked to groups who've had to cancel MRIs, they've had to reschedule surgeries or delay infusions, but not because the care wasn't ready, but because the coverage wasn't. So what we're seeing is a reframing. These insurance related workflows aren't just operational anymore, they're integral for delivering care. These processes are getting more complex. Plans change mid-month. Payers modify their medical necessity policies quarterly. Actually, they will modify them even more frequently than that. And patients often don't know what their coverage actually includes. So this is where AI agents become even more incredibly valuable. Imagine an agent that reviews the order the moment it hits your system. It scans the CPT and diagnosis code, it checks against the patient's coverage file, and determines if a prior authorization is even required. If it is, it starts the process right then with no delays. If the plan switched since scheduling, well, the agent catches it and reroutes the request. If the diagnosis code doesn't meet medical necessity, it flags it early before submission. That's not just automation, that's clinical support through administrative intelligence. One concern I hear a lot is, isn't this just pushing more work to the front end team? Well, honestly, not if it's done right. The whole point of using the agent is to relieve the team, to relieve the staff, and not bury them. When agents handle the routine, your staff can focus on patient communication, solving edge cases, and keeping the schedule intact. And let's not forget the patient experience. When a patient walks into your imaging center or say your ambulatory surgery center or whatever the scenario is, they don't care about the eligibility files. They want to know that their services are approved and ready and they're just going to get it over with. That's the true goal of this shift. Reducing surprise reschedules, boosting provider confidence, and giving patients a smoother experience. So while this work may still be technically live in patient access, it now affects the entire clinical journey, which means it deserves smarter tools, stronger visibility, and yes, agents who do more than follow checklists. Now, in 2025, coverage validation is part of care delivery, and our systems need to treat it that way. Now, moving to the third shift, I want to talk about is one that is really affecting just about every organization I've spoken to lately. And that's the move toward platform consolidation to address growing fragmentation in the revenue cycle. Now, for the past decade, probably even longer, most health systems and provider groups built their RCM stack like a patchwork quilt. A point solution for prior auth over here, a clearinghouse portal for claims over there, a separate dashboard for denials. Even if you're using a dashboard, kudos to you. Most still using spreadsheets, and maybe a bolt-on analytics tool that's trying to make sense of all of that information. Well, it worked kind of, but it also created silos. It disconnected workflows and a whole lot of frustration. And here's what's really changed. Organizations now realize that fragmentation isn't just annoying, it's costing them real money and creating risk. Think about a patient account that gets scheduled in one system, eligibility is verified in another, authorized in a third perhaps, and then billed out in a fourth platform. Somewhere in that chain, the payer's requirements change and no one catches it. Now you've got a denial. Or worse, you've got a duplicate entry or a missing authorization ID or maybe a payment delay that no one can track because the system doesn't talk or the systems don't communicate with each other. I think you get the picture of what I'm trying to say here. I was on a call recently where someone said our tools are creating more work than they solve. And that really stuck with me because that's where a lot of teams are right now. They're juggling 5 dashboards, 12 logins, maybe 25 tabs that just to push a single claim through. That's not a people problem. That's really a system design problem. So what we're seeing now is this shift away from best of breed toward best of integration. And leaders are saying, I don't need 10 good tools. I need one or two great ones that actually work together and communicate. It sounds a lot like interoperability, doesn't it? And that's been a problem we've been trying to solve for many, many years. And this is where AI agents can play a critical role. Because even if you're not ready to rip and replace your entire tech stack, and just be honest, who is? And most orgs aren't, you can start using agents to orchestrate across systems. So let me give you an example. You've got an eligibility tool that doesn't talk to your EHR and a prior auth system that's completely separate from claims. Instead of building a massive integration, you can actually introduce an AI agent that sits between them, watching for mismatches, flagging missing data, and routing tasks to the right team. That agent becomes your traffic controller. It doesn't replace your platforms, it connects them. And now I want to acknowledge another concern here because I hear it very often. We've already invested in too many platforms. How do we consolidate without starting over? Well, the answer is gradual orchestration. It's not going to happen overnight. You need to start by identifying the handoffs that break. Do the analysis, do the work in collecting that data to make sure where the loopholes are, where the fragmentation is. And that places where the places where claims or tasks or data fall through the cracks. Then layer in agents that can monitor those moments, validate information, and even guide it to the right place. Now, over time, you can consolidate organically by turning off redundant tools, standardizing workflows, and simplifying your tech stack. I know it's easier said than done, and I'm probably preaching to the choir. But here's the bonus. When you reduce the number of systems your teams needs to log into, you increase their productivity and you also reduce any burnout. That's not just good for operations, it's good for retention. So we're saying more organizations start to ask questions like, well, can we use a single platform for eligibility, auth, and billing? Can our denial data feed directly into our workflow prioritization? Can we track financial performance across the full cycle without stitching together reports from 5 different places? I know this may be something that you've asked yourselves, but those questions used to feel like wishful thinking. Now they're becoming part of platform strategy conversations, and agents are making the transition possible. So this third shift is about more than cost. It's about clarity. It's about reducing the noise. It's about giving your team one path to do their work and giving leadership one set of numbers to measure it. Fragmentation was a byproduct to try and solve too many problems in isolation. Platform consolidation with agent orchestration layered in is how we start solving problems as a system. And in a complex, margin tight world like RCM, simplicity isn't a luxury, it's a competitive advantage. Now, quickly moving to shift number 4 is one we didn't used to talk about in revenue cycle meetings, but now it's front and center. That's the shift from viewing cybersecurity as an IT concern to treating it as a core component of operational continuity. Now, let's be honest. For a long time, security was seen as something that lived in the server room. It was firewalls, endpoint protections, maybe a phishing awareness training once a year. Important, but not exactly a hot topic in your billing meetings. And I know there's not a whole lot of hot topics in billing meetings. But then came February 2024. That cyber attack didn't just knock out a vendor, it froze the entire healthcare lifeline for thousands of providers. Now, I know I don't need to tell any of you this, that you've actually experienced this, but things happened. It just really broke down a lot. Claims couldn't be submitted, status checks stopped, payment files didn't post, phone systems went down, portals went dark, and just like that, cybersecurity became a revenue cycle emergency. And what we learned painfully is that if your infrastructure isn't secure, your ability to operate disappears. It's not just about protecting data, it's about protecting cash flow, workflows, and clinical coordination. So here's the shift. Healthcare organizations are now looking at cybersecurity as a resiliency strategy, not just a compliance checkbox. And revenue cycle leaders are being pulled into those conversations. And that makes sense because if your systems go down, you don't just lose access, you lose control. Denials pile up, aging grows, claims don't get resubmitted, and the longer it takes to get back online, the harder it is to catch up. So, what does this have to do with agents? Well, quite a bit actually, because intelligent agents, if designed and deployed correctly, again, very important, can serve as a critical layer of defensive continuity. For example, imagine an AI agent that tracks daily claims volume, payer responses, and EDI transactions. If something suddenly stops, such as no statuses returned, no payments posted, that agent can alert your team before someone notices it manually. Or let's say a human error leads to bad data going out, like perhaps a batch of claims missing a required field. A good agent can catch the anomaly based on deviations from historical norms. It doesn't wait for the denials, it actually flags it because of the trend. Now, agents can also log every action taken, which becomes critical during incident responses. Now, when payers demand documentation or audit trails, an agent-powered RCM stack can say, hey, here's who's touched what, when, and why. Now, I'll pause here because there's an understandable concern. Aren't agents themselves a security risk? If they have access to systems, couldn't they be exploited? Well, absolutely. If not designed with the right safeguards. Just like any user or API, agents must have access controls, audit logs, and usage thresholds. They're just like everybody else. The difference is agents don't click suspicious links or fall for phishing scams. So in many cases, they actually reduce your risk surface by automating processes that would otherwise require multiple people logging in from different devices. Now, I've seen organizations use agents to monitor assets behavior across complete RCM platforms, catching anomalies in login patterns, data export activity, or failed authentications. Now, it's not just operational, that's strategic defense. And here's the real kicker. Security and simplicity often go hand in hand. When your workflows are streamlined, when your tech stack is consolidated, and when your agents handle repetitive interactions, there are fewer doors for bad actors to walk through. So the takeaway from this shift is clear. Security isn't just the CISO's job. Revenue cycle isn't just about claims and payments anymore. And agents, when built right, can be connective tissue between compliance, continuity, as well as control. So if you're building an automation strategy in 2025, it's not enough to ask what the agent can do. You have to ask, how does this agent protect us when things go wrong? Because in the world where one cyber event can stop your revenue in its tracks, resilience is now the most valuable feature in RCM. Now, shifting to number five of, of it's all about accountability. And I'll just say it very plainly. In 2025, ROI cannot be aspirational anymore. It has to be visible, measurable, and tied to real outcomes. For years, a lot of technology purchases in healthcare were based on faith. The promises were very compelling, and you've probably heard these before. We'll streamline your revenue cycle. We'll cut your cost in half. Or my personal favorite, we'll automate everything. But when you look back after a year, the questions start rolling in. Did we collect more? Did we reduce our denials? Did our staff workload actually decrease? Did this tool help us close the books faster or resolve claims faster? And if the answer is, well, we think so, but we can't prove it, then the tool is no longer safe. It's now a liability. And that's the reality many teams are facing this year. Budgets are tight, margins are razor thin, and every investment, whether it's a full platform or a single AI agent, has to show its work. So the shift here is really about moving from tools that sound promising to tools that perform and can prove it. And this is where I think AI agents again offer something different than traditional automation because a lot of legacy automation is silent. It works in the background, but it doesn't report. You don't always know what it's doing, how much time it's saving, or whether it's generating results until something goes wrong and it's too late. But an AI agent, on the other hand, is designed to track its own performance. For example, if you have an agent that handles claim status inquiries, it should be able to tell you how many inquiries it performed this week, how many resulted in payer action, how many claims it moved to resolution without human involvement, and what percentage of AI inventory it's touching versus ignoring. Now, that kind of visibility transforms the conversation. It's no longer we think it's helping, it becomes here's what it delivered, and here's where we still need help. Now, that's measurable ROI. And here's something else to think about. ROI isn't just about speed or volume, it's about impact at scale. So let's say you have an agent that reduces your average time to payment by 4 days. That might not sound very dramatic until you realize that across your total monthly claim volume, that's millions in accelerated cash flow. Or maybe an agent helps you reduce your first pass denial rate by 6%, which is a pretty big jump. That doesn't just save money, it frees up your denial management team to focus on high risk payers or complex cases where human expertise actually moves the needle. Now, one concern I hear often is, well, how do we measure ROI without creating another project? Because it sounds like, oh, this is another team, another committee. We got to go back and now we got to review all this information. Well, the good news is your agent can help with that too. A well-built agent logs every interaction, maps actions to outcomes, and can even generate simple dashboards that feed directly into your operational reports. You don't need to hire data scientists. You just need tools that track what they do. And let's be honest, if a vendor or solution can't show you a business case within 90 days, you're not buying a solution, you're buying a story. Now, the bar has been raised. CFOs, COOs, and even CMOs are asking tougher questions. What's the dollar value of this solution? What KPIs does it move? What happens if we turn it off tomorrow? And if you don't have answers, not just projections, but real performance, the conversation stops right there. So this shift, ROI must be proven, not promised, is a much about how we evaluate vendors as it is about how we deploy and manage the technology. So AI agents give us an opportunity to embed accountability directly into the system. They work, they log, they report. And in a climate where every dollar has to be justified, that transparency might be the most valuable feature of all. Now, our final shift today is one that ties all of the others together, and that's the reimagining of the workforce model in a world where automation and AI agents are becoming the norm, not the exception. So let's start with a hard truth. We're not going back to the 2018 staffing levels. The old model where every increase in patient volume meant hiring more billers, more authorization staff, more follow-up reps, uh, you named a position. It's no longer sustainable. We've hit a ceiling, and the labor market isn't recovering fast enough. Burnout is still high, and even if you could hire more people, most organizations can't afford to. So the shift here is this. We're moving from volume-based staffing to value-based staffing, where teams are designed not just to execute tasks, but to manage systems, including digital ones. Now, I've seen org charts that used to have 15 people in claims follow-up, and now they have 5 people, maybe even less, with about 2 or 3 AI agents doing the same work. Not because anyone was laid off, but because the work changed. And that's the key point. When you introduce intelligent agents, the work doesn't disappear, it evolves. Your staff goes from clicking through claim statuses to reviewing exception reports, from calling payers for offs to managing escalations, from reworking denials to preventing them in the first place. Now, this just requires a new kind of workforce model. It actually requires a different mindset, one where you're hiring not just for RCM experience, which is still very important, but for problem solving, tech literacy, and process thinking. And just like you train a new employee, you need to train and retrain your AI agents. Someone has to configure them, monitor their performance, adjust their logic, and integrate their insights into broader workflows. So, what we're really talking about is a blended workforce, people and agents, strategy and automation, human empathy and machine precision. And when it works, it's very powerful. One org I spoke with has restructured their patient access team into 3 layers. They have a frontline team handling high touch cases, a digital agent layer re-verifying or verifying benefits from the get-go and launching auths if needed, and a quality review team validating that everything is working upstream. And the result is that they had 30% fewer rescheduled appointments, 18% reduction in auth-related denials, and a team that's less exhausted at the end of the week. But of course, this kind of redesign brings up a very human concern, and that is, well, what happens to my team? I've heard this question over and over and over in the last year or so. So everyone's top of mind, and that's a real question, and the answer depends upon leadership. The most successful organizations don't use agents to replace people. They use agents to protect people from burnout and to elevate them into a higher value roles. Now think of it this way. Let agents handle the 60% of work that's rules-based and repetitive, and then let your people focus on the 40% remaining that's ambiguous, nuanced, and relational. That's where human intelligence shines, and that's where patients feel the difference. I'll share a quote from a team lead at a large imaging group. When we stopped hiring for production and started hiring for judgment and gave our staff the right tools to support them, our whole cultural changed. That's the opportunity to redesign your workforce, not as a response to staffing shortages, but as a proactive investment in capability. So this final shift is about more than efficiency. It's about intention. If AI agents are going to become part of our teams, then we need to build teams around them, not just bolt them on. That means revisiting job descriptions, rethinking performance metrics, and investing in retraining. Because if we don't, we risk creating systems that are technically impressive, but culturally unsustainable. But if we get this right, if we design human agent teams with clarity, empathy, and purpose, we unlock a future where revenue cycle teams aren't just surviving the next denial wave, they're leading the next wave of transformation. So that's it. Those are the 6 shifts I wanted to walk through today. And here's what I hope you take away from this, that these aren't just trends. They're active changes I see playing out right now across provider types, team structures, organizations, budgets, you name it. And as these shifts take hold, the role of AI agents become clearer, not as a replacement for people, but as a resource that helps people do more of the work that matters and less of the work that burns them out. I want to thank all of you who have joined me for this episode of Office Hours and putting up with my solo rant, but I hope that if anything I said has sparked a thought or raised a question or touched a nerve, I'd love to hear from you. You can contact me or connect with me on LinkedIn, or better yet, reach out through us through our website. Just send me your questions or comments directly, and I'd be happy to dig deeper or even continue the conversation one-on-one if you like. So until next time, take care, keep building the future of RCM with intention.